Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we return to talking about the U.S. women's soccer team. They've been getting a lot of attention over the last year since they won the World Cup in their division in a very exciting game. Now, this brought attention to them for a number of reasons, but not all of them were exactly good. You see, first of all, when it happened last year when the U.S. women's soccer team won, they got a little bit of a backlash when they over celebrated and kind of got a little bit too enthusiastic with their winning. I mean, I'm not saying you can't be excited to win, you can't be cool, you can't be into it, but what happened with the girls was just like a lot of gloating and seemed a little bit in poor taste. So people started to take notice. In addition to that, all the news stations and the mainstream media were propping these guys up too. So it brought a lot of attention to this team, which, to be fair, I mean, women's soccer isn't nothing, but it's not the most popular sport here in America. We all know that the most professional sports, the sports like NFL, NBA, MLB, all the main leagues here are mainly men's sports. Not to say women's sports don't have their own fans, but this story brought up a lot of issues. First of all, there was the gloating, and then people started talking about men versus women again, which is what usually comes up in these sporting situations, and that's what brings us to today's story. So whenever the women's soccer team won last year, what got introduced was the old argument about equal pay. So supposedly, you guys probably know, but women claim to be getting paid less than men per hour at the same jobs here in America. But as we've debunked many times, that's just simply not true. The study they use is being misinterpreted, and they're not actually judging hour per hour amount of work. They're judging men versus women on whole, on average, saying on average men make a lot more while women make about maybe 60% of the money men make. But that's not because things aren't fair. We're not comparing job for job. We're not saying a male nurse gets paid for whatever 40% more than a female nurse. No, what we're saying is that male nurse is probably working way more hours, or they might have more experience, or they're in a whole other job altogether. We're talking about comparing a doctor to a nurse, for example, which isn't really fair when you think about it, but that's what these studies are all based on, and they're trying to prove the point that they think women need to get paid more, but really it's not about equality then, because if they want women to get paid more, that means they want them to get paid more for doing less work in easier jobs with less training. So it's not really a fairness situation like they claim. Really, they're just trying to sneak this in and get women more money, and that's what's happening in soccer right now. Now, this question was raised last year when the women's soccer team won, and now it's kind of come to a conclusion a little bit, at least in some point, because there's this new article out and there's a new verdict on this lawsuit that the women's soccer team started, and it didn't go too well for them. It didn't go in their favor as expected because their logic is flawed. I mean, they shouldn't be winning anything like this. Anyone that's reasonable, like any judge or lawyer that sees all the facts here, they're going to realize, yeah, women aren't getting paid less. They're getting paid what their industry allows. So, for example, in this example, they're comparing women's soccer to men's soccer, but it really doesn't even compare if you think about it, because men's soccer is like one of the most popular sports in the world. Granted, it's not super popular in America. America has other sports that are our favorite, but it's still big here too. We have American soccer teams. We've had American players as well, but globally and overall, soccer is one of the hugest sports in the world, and for some reason, these girls think they should get paid more, even though their soccer games aren't drawing in as many fans. That's where the money comes from. That's why certain teams get paid more. Like if you work on, say, the Yankee team, you might get a bigger salary than if you worked on a smaller team no one's heard of as much, like, say, the Brewers, or in a smaller market like, say, the Cleveland Indians or something. Like, those teams have less money in their budget than the New York Yankees or even the LA Dodgers. So there's legitimate reasons for why this happened, and none of it has to do with sexism. That seems to be the claim here, or at least it's a very heavy implication. But we all know SJWs, they basically don't have proof of sexism. They never have proof of racism either. They just point to something that's different and say, hey, that's because of racism or sexism in this case. So with all that said, let's jump to this article that has more details. It's called "Judge Dismisses U.S. Women's National Soccer Team's Equal Pay Claims." So that's as expected. As I stated, this is a bogus case coming out of basically the SJW movement. This is a feminist kind of thing, flawed logic, basically women pretending they want equality, but they really don't, and the judges can see right through that because they're not news people. They're not trying to push a liberal bias for the most part. Judges do have political affiliations too, and that can get political sometimes, but they usually tend to be fair, hopefully, and it seems to be a fair ruling on this. Now, Before we get to the article, let's see if we could check out some of this video.
We're trying to prepare for the Olympics and win this tournament and be as good as we can be. Now we got to put effort towards this, and pull the media team and lawyers and everybody out on a Saturday. Not the nicest move, let me say. I'm not sure it really achieved what it was intended to. I don't know.
Not really much substance to that video, but this is a clip of Megan Rapinoe. She's one of the U.S. soccer women's players. She led the team. She was one of the ones doing the crazy celebrations that got a little bit of the backlash, and she's also the one that got super political and went in all the news shows afterwards, and she's still doing stuff like that too. It's kind of annoying because I remember seeing her interview like Joe Biden. I think she was one of the celebrities that had some kind of interviews with random people during this whole lockdown situation we have because of the sickness going around, and she was like another athlete. Like Steph Curry was one of the first ones, this basketball player, and he interviewed a bunch of people, which is funny. But whichever, I mean, fine if you want to make some content. I guess these athletes are bored, but I think I saw Megan Rapinoe interview like Biden or something. It was kind of cringy. Maybe it was Bernie. Either way, she's still very political, very liberal, very annoying, and she's pushing this false narrative that women aren't getting paid enough, but really, women are getting paid what their industry provides. So if there's a certain amount of fans providing a certain amount of income, that's the amount of money that they deserve. And just because you go and look at another company making more, you can't just say, hey, they have more money, let's equally distribute it. It doesn't work that way. Even within certain divisions, like again, I used that baseball analogy earlier, this would be sort of equivalent to say, the Atlanta Braves pointing over at the New York Yankees and saying, hey, why do they have such a big budget? We should be getting paid the same. But any rational person would realize, hey, the Yankees have a bigger fan base. They have a lot of money coming in. Their games are selling out every week. I'm sure the Braves do fine too, but they're just not in as big a market. No one's as big as the New York Yankees, and that's nothing to say against the Braves either, but I think you guys get the point. Now let's read on to this article and see where this thing goes. The U.S. women's national team's fight for equality suffered a major blow Friday as a federal judge rejected the players' claims that they were paid less than the men's national team. Claims by the players of unequal working conditions based on travel conditions, specifically charter flights and hotel accommodations, and support services, specifically medical and training support, can still go to trial. The USWNT originally filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Soccer Federation in March 2019, with 28 members of the team listed as plaintiffs. Friday's ruling was issued in response to a motion for summary judgment to dismiss the lawsuit by the Federation in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, according to the court filing. The suit alleges the U.S. Soccer Federation's payment practices amount to federal discrimination by paying women less than men for substantially equal work and by denying them at least equal playing, training, and travel conditions, equal promotion of their games, equal support and development for their games, and other terms and conditions of employment equal to the MNT, which is the men's national team, I believe. And yes, it looks like CNN is obviously going to side with the SJWs here. They're going to say the women deserve to get paid more, even though their industry isn't providing as much profit to pay their players as much. That's why these players get paid more in certain situations. It's the same when you go sport to sport. NBA is the biggest basketball league in the world, so the best players go there, and they compete, and then the best players will get the best contracts. And sometimes you think maybe these athletes are overpaid. LeBron James making hundreds of millions of dollars, Tom Brady as well, these big names, but it's because their industry provides for that. So that team decided they could afford to pay, say, 40, 50 million a year to Tom Brady, and that's because the Patriots are a long established legacy team. They've been around forever, they've been winning forever, and money keeps coming in. Their fan base keeps growing, so they can keep paying more, and that's how they get the top dollar. That's how LeBron gets it in basketball, and the same thing goes with soccer. See, here's the trick here, and here's something no one's ever kind of mentioned. CNN's not going to mention it because they're trying to back the ladies, but if the ladies want more, why don't they just go play in the bigger leagues? They could play in the men's national team. They could play in the professional soccer. They could go audition for all those leagues in South America, Europe. There's tons of soccer leagues out there. If they really want to get paid more, they should practice and go play for those teams. But the truth of the matter is, and not to be too harsh, but these girls could not cut it in the harder leagues. They would not be able to compete with the male leagues at all. That's why you see Major League Soccer, MLS, dominated by dudes. Now, there's no strict rule in these leagues that girls can't compete. Girls could go and play in the NFL too. They could play in the NBA, MLB, all that stuff. They have the option. There's no rule against it. But what happens is No girl has made it that high. That's why they have these separate leagues for them, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with them playing their own games in a separate level. But we got to admit that it's a lower level. It's a sort of minor league compared to the major level. Now, we sometimes call the major leagues male sports. We say male basketball, male baseball, but really those are just baseball, and it happens to be all dudes. And then you have to make the distinction, now that we do have women's leagues, we called these other ones the men's leagues. But the truth is, a girl could come up if they really were good enough, but the problem is they just can't cut it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of parts of our bodies are different. Guys can produce more muscle. We have the testosterone hormone that provides a good amount of advantages when you're doing sports, but girls have smaller frames, and there's nothing wrong with that, and they have different strengths and skills, and they can also play sports too, but they're certainly on a different level. And I think we all need to admit these kinds of truths. There's a difference here, and the women's league is on a separate level, and if they wanted more money, they could go to the big leagues, but the problem is they can't cut it. That's why they're trying to ask for more money, even though they can't afford it. However, Judge R. Gary Klausner wrote in his decision that members of the USWNT did not prove wage discrimination under the Equal Pay Act because the women's team played more games and made more money than the men's team. The women's team also rejected a collective bargaining agreement where they would have the same pay structure as the men's team in favor of a different CBA, Klausner wrote. Okay, this is interesting. So it looks like the women actually played more games and made more money than the men's team. So they made more and they want more. I'm not getting the point here. It seems the judge has exposed them as total frauds. I didn't realize this was a truth here, but it seems also they've accepted a different deal and they're upset about that deal. So they have some regret here, and they're trying to blame it on something else. This is a similar situation to, I remember the Taylor Swift story. She had a bad contract that she made with her original record company, who now owns all her original music, and now she's trying to get it back, and she went to court and claimed sexism and acted like she was getting taken advantage of when really she just signed a bad deal. That's what these SJW women do, and that's what the women's soccer team is doing. They're claiming sexism, they're acting like things aren't fair when really they just signed a bad deal that they regret making. In addition to that, you could point out how they have more games, so they're spread out thinner, and that makes their pay maybe not seem as much, even though they're getting paid more. Very interesting, great developments here, and a great end to today's story. Thanks for watching today's show, guys. Make sure you comment your thoughts on everything below. This is very interesting. I'm glad to see a conclusion come to this women's soccer situation, and it's very interesting that CNN and others still back these myths up. Girls are trying to file lawsuits to get things that they feel they have earned, but they haven't, and they're regretting decisions they made previously, and they're of course blaming things on sexism when really we could see there's a much different story. Tell me what you think about everything below, and make sure you hit a like if you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching, and you guys have a good one.